Ibrahim Shafaa. I am the co-CEO of New Schools for New Orleans in New Orleans. I was also a 1997 Mississippi Delta Teach for America Corps member. I taught 5th grade at Carver Elementary School in Indianola, Mississippi for 3 years. I have since worked in charter schools in New York. I started a charter school in New York, and I've been in New Orleans since 2007 with a brief stint at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I'm here today to talk about the transformation of the New Orleans system of schools. And the word transformation implies that something is done. And so I want to start with that caveat. We are absolutely not done. We do not have the system of schools that we want for every child and every family in New Orleans yet. But I am excited to have the opportunity to talk about the work that educators, students, and families have done over the last 8 years, some of them in this room, to get us to where we are today. But first I want to start with a story about the system that we have. So this is Fortier High School, and in 2003, Louisiana seniors had to take a graduate exit exam, it's a state exam, in order to graduate from high school. Bridget Green was a student at Fortier High School, and she did everything that her teachers asked of her, everything her school asked of her, and received the honor of being named valedictorian of the class of 2003 at Fortier. Bridget did not graduate from Fortier High School because despite having done all of those things, she could not pass the state's graduate exit exam after 5 attempts. Bridget was a student in the Orleans Parish School District. At the time, that school district was ranked 67 out of 68 in Louisiana, one of the lowest ranking states in terms of student outcomes in our country. And at that time, 75% of the open enrollment schools in Orleans Parish would have been designated as academically unacceptable by state standards. As all of you will remember, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, devastating the city of New Orleans, and leaving 80% of our schools underwater. The governor decided to close schools for that year, and it was really educators that took up the moral obligation to start schools quickly, because for the remaining students in New Orleans, they wanted them to have a sense of normalcy, a place to go to school every day. And they wanted to make sure that the families that were dispersed across the country had a place to come home to for their children. Our state policymakers set up the regulatory framework to ensure that that could happen. And so those decisions made at a very chaotic time actually have become the system we have today. So the system we have today operates on 3 important principles. The first is that operating schools is in the hands of educators. So schools get to make, school leaders, teachers get to make the decisions around curriculum, instructional strategy, what kind of school culture, what is the strategy for ensuring student excellence and academic achievement. None of that is dictated to them, they make those decisions. The second is that families have the opportunity, despite where they live in New Orleans, despite what the academic history has been for their child, they have the opportunity to choose amongst those schools. What is radically different in New Orleans today is the role of government. The government does not operate schools in New Orleans, but instead serves as a regulator to ensure that parents have equal access amongst open enrollment schools and that schools are meeting their academic targets. There's been a lot in the media recently about how, as of next year, the Recovery School District in New Orleans will no longer operate schools. And we will be the first nearly all charter district in the country. That shouldn't be the headline, honestly. What should be the headline is the academic results that have come from these 3 principles over the last 8 years, which has been arguably the biggest academic turnaround success story for an urban district in our nation's recent history. So what you see before you here is student data from the year prior to Katrina. In Louisiana, schools receive a school performance score. And anything under a 75 is considered academic before 2005, 75% of students were in failing schools. But what we've seen over time is a steep decline in the number of students attending or remaining in failing schools. So it's 7 or 8. So we don't know. And so 09-10 was an interesting year because two things happened. One, we saw sort of a stabilization of the student population. We had less students coming into the system than we had returning back to New Orleans because of the hurricane than we had in previous years. But we also won the Super Bowl. So I don't know about causation and correlation, but that was a really good year for the city of New Orleans. So here we have 10 and 11. 11 and 12. 12 and 13. So we went in just 8 years from a system where 75% of the students were attending a failing school to a system where only 17% are. By every metric imaginable, schools have been improving in New Orleans over the last 8 years. In 2005, nearly half of Louisiana's failing schools were in New Orleans. Now it's about 8%. Students in New Orleans have increased their passage rate on state exams by 80% since 2005. And as you see here, our 4-year cohort graduation rate in the last 5 years has gone up in double digits and has surpassed our state's average. Despite all of that, we're not yet where we want to be. How many of you in here are parents? Raise your hand. How about aunts, uncles, siblings, 2 school-aged children? Great. Put your hands down. So in our common enrollment system, parents have the opportunity to preference schools. They turn in their preferred list to the Recovery School District. The school district gives that to a computer, and there's an algorithm that takes parent preference as well as the supply of seats and assigns each family a child. So I want you to imagine a child, your own, one that is dear to you. And I want you to think about your district. And I want you to think about whether or not you would be satisfied, absolutely, 100% certain, that whatever school your child is assigned, you would be happy. So I am a parent of 2 near school-aged students, children. They're not students yet. And I can say for myself that New Orleans is not yet there. And that is ultimately the system we want. We want a system where every parent can feel secure that their child is being prepared for college and career. And there's evidence that my fellow New Orleans parents feel the same way. Through our common enrollment system, we have data that indicates that parents are, by far and large, choosing the highest performing schools for their kids. We just don't have enough supply to meet that demand. In fact, at our highest performing open enrollment high school, only 1 in 5 students is achieving an ACT score that predicts college success. We have a long way to go. Our educators have done the Herculean work of, in a very short amount of time, lifting an F system, making it a C system. In order for us to say that in New Orleans every child is receiving an excellent education, we are now embarking on the complex work of lifting the system from C to A. And there are a unique set of challenges that go along with that. Way too many to name, but I'm going to talk about 4. The first one is we have to continue with the implementation of Common Core. The standards as they exist in Louisiana right now are not rigorous enough. If you want to Google that, you can see the war between our state superintendent and our governor. But in order to make sure that every child is being prepared for college and career, we have to have confidence that at every grade level and in every content area, what is being presented to children is preparing them on a path of prosperity. The second one is an enduring continue to rely on the pipelines we have relied on to get us where we are. Our back of the envelope math says we have to hire 600 to 800 new teachers every year in a 45,000 kid district. It's not sustainable. We should look at the opportunity of record numbers of students graduating from high school and going to college and think about how do we take these New Orleans graduates throughout their undergraduate careers, recruit them to come back to New Orleans, to be involved in the movement that they themselves helped start, to educate future generations of New Orleans kids. The third is there are very unique challenges of being a decentralized system, and one of them is ensuring. And a lot of our charters, and particularly some that I see in the audience, are doing this. But we have to make sure that our most vulnerable students are also getting a high quality education. So our students with disabilities, our students who are involved in the juvenile justice system, and our students who are being expelled, we have to make sure that they are not lost in the cracks. And then fourth, we don't think of our schools in New Orleans as a bunch of charters or as a model, but we think about them as public schools that exist in the rich cultural and historic context that is New Orleans, Louisiana. For this system to be permanent, we have to make sure that every family in New Orleans sees themselves in our schools. Schools like KIPP Renaissance High School, pictured here, are thinking deeply about this. And their leaders are thinking about, and the other leaders around the city, how can we make sure that we continue to have high academic expectations for all students, while at the same time creating a high school or a school experience that honors the legacies and traditions of New Orleans. Despite these challenges, we remain really optimistic. I'm going to close today with the story of Leonard Gallimard. Leonard was born to a 13-year-old mother, and his father was gunned down at a very early age. Leonard was 9 when Hurricane Katrina hit, and so he evacuated to Houston. In Houston, he had to enroll in a school, and he very quickly realized the expectations of him in New Orleans were very different than they were in Houston. Leonard became a scholar, he became a reader. When he came back to New Orleans several years later, he enrolled in his neighborhood school. It happened to be one of the last traditional, public, failing high schools in New Orleans. But right upstate, so as Leonard was going through his high school classes, he realized that the school he was in just didn't share his aspirations. He realized that he wanted something different, and right upstairs from him was, in the same building, a new charter school called Cohen College Prep. And in the name of that school, Leonard saw a vision for his future, one that he felt like he shared with that school. And so as a senior, Leonard enrolled himself in Cohen College Prep High School. So I started today with the story of a valedictorian who was not adequately prepared to graduate from high school. And I end today with the story of Leonard Gallimard, who will be a freshman at Yale University this fall. Leonard's story really illustrates the hope and the opportunity and the promise of the system of schools that we have in New Orleans today. And so thank you for allowing me to share it.
So my name is Ash Solar. Just a quick bio, because I'll share a little bit about how I found my way to the Achievement School District as part of the little presentation. But I'm an 03 Corps member. I taught in Houston. I was a 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade bilingual language arts teacher. I spent my 2 Corps years at Ryan Elementary, which was closed after my 2nd year, and had the privilege to go work with an amazing principal, Adriana Castro, who opened Moreno Elementary just down the road. The juxtaposition of those 2 experiences was really powerful in terms of what's possible even in a large urban district, of a closing failed school and the potential and possibility of a new district school. After teaching in Houston, I went to grad school. Stanford's got this nifty 2-for-1 deal where you can get an MBA and a master's in education. So I went and pursued that. Fell in love in California, which derailed my career plans of coming back to Houston, and ended up spending the next 3 years in Oakland Unified, where I had the opportunity to work with a lot of incredible educators, including Nima, who's in the back, doing incredible work as a principal at Garfield Elementary. After those 3 years, was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, but I'll park there and kind of dive into that as part of this presentation. So what I was hoping to share with you is a little bit about the Achievement School District in Tennessee, a little bit about how we came to be, what we're up to, what we've learned from the incredible work in New Orleans. I think it goes without saying that as soon as we started trying to figure out what we were going to do in Tennessee, the first thing we did was we started to learn as much as we could about the incredible things happening in New Orleans. And the work's always easier when you get to stand on the shoulders of giants. So thank you, Maggie, for the work you've done, your team has done, and all the educators in New Orleans have done. And so I think what you'll see in our work is a lot of trying to learn from that work, as well as to put a little bit of a different kind of Tennessee flavor on it. So before diving into the Achievement School District, we're all here because at one point or another, we came across this fancy little mission, and it got our juices flowing, right? We believed that one day this should be true, right? And what I want to talk about is what we're doing in the Achievement School District and how it ties directly to this. Before diving into that, a little bit about coming up as a core member in Houston, right? So as a first-year teacher at Ryan Elementary, 3 blocks away from Yes Prep's North Central campus, I was really passionate about my 4th graders' futures, their careers, their lives. The middle school that they were zoned to was one of the worst middle schools in Houston. And halfway down the road to the failing district school was Yes Prep North Central, an amazing 6 through 12 campus, right? And so I got really excited about, I'm going to take as many of my students to Yes. I'm going to get them fired up about Yes. They're going to show up on a Saturday, they're going to enroll, and I'll be able to sleep easy knowing that from 6 to 12, as long as they put in the work, they're going to do business. If I took 50 families to Yes, probably 8 of those students enrolled, right? If the students had got to pick, they would have all enrolled. They loved it. They loved what they saw. They loved the curriculum. They loved the energy. They loved the students. But the reality is, whatever barrier, whether it was the sibling was already in the middle school, the parent couldn't come on the Saturday, whatever the barrier was, that child did not get to attend Yes, and they had to go farther down the road to an incredibly underperforming middle school. And so for me, I got really passionate about district versus charter, right? And while I was a Yes groupie, I'd crash their parties whenever they'd let me. I'd send as many of my students as I could. A conversation with Chris and Mike Feinberg kind of seared in my brain something that kind of pointed me down a path professionally, which was the charter schools at the time were kind of like FedEx to the post office. And until you have somebody who can deliver mail overnight, there's no impetus for the post office to figure out how to deliver mail overnight. So I believed that, and I knew that they were doing amazing work at Yes and at KIPP and a bunch of other great charter organizations. But I also knew that if somebody didn't stick around at the post office to figure out how to get the post office right, the kids who were in the district schools were trying to send mail that way, were never going to get the level of service that they deserve. And so I kind of seared in my brain and said, I'm going to root for the Yes folks, I'm going to root for the KIPP folks, and I'm going to be the stubborn guy who stays in the district and fights the good fight and tries to catch up. But here's the bottom line. I mean, and I told the story of my students, right? I sent 50 families, maybe 8 enrolled. And by the way, over the last 2 years, I've got to go back to the Yes Senior Signing Day and watch those 4th graders walk the stage and announce where they're going to college. So the work that's happening at Yes is absolutely amazing. The goosebumps, the tears that comes with it. I actually did Sleep Easy for those kids for the last, 8-10 years is truly amazing. But I wonder, what happened to the Pedro? What happened to Santiago? What happened to those whose families didn't enroll them, right? And I think in terms of the one day all students, for me, our call to action has to be, how do we bring that one day quicker to all students? There are kids that we know are in underserved communities and underperforming schools just sitting there. If they could get in their own car, drive across town, they would do it, but for whatever reason, they are 10, and they are stuck going to the school that they're stuck going to. And I think our call to action has to be, how many are there? What is the percentage? Is it 5% of our schools are unacceptable? 10%? 20%? Probably varies community to community. Well, in Tennessee, they set the mark at 5%. And there are over 30,000 kids in Tennessee, I'll use air quotes, but I'll say stuck in priority schools, which are bottom 5% schools in the state. And so, while I was in California, happy personally, exploring opportunities professionally, with all due respect to any Tennesseans in the room, never in my wildest dreams did I think I would end up in Tennessee. Not a knock on Tennessee, I just didn't know. I didn't have family there, didn't have reason to be there. It was dead even with Mars in terms of likely places to serve. But the more I started to learn about what was happening, the more I realized there was an incredibly unprecedented opportunity afoot in Tennessee. Years of hard work at the political level, the philanthropic level, the policy level. There was a lot of great people doing a lot of great work to create the context to radically change the education that our most underserved students were getting access to. So you can't see it, you don't need to see it, but this is the original legislation for the Achievement School District. This is half of it, so there's not a whole lot of meat on the bones. And there's stuff like they will have an appropriate professional uniform code, but it's missing stuff like they have the right to hire teachers. Right? So a lot of great pieces, a couple gaps, but at the end of the day, an unprecedented opportunity was born, right? And so, as many of you know, Tennessee was the recipient of Race to the Top grant. The state received $500 million to do incredible work. I think you've heard about some of it over the last couple days. For the Achievement School District, they've set aside $25–30 million to build a statewide district responsible for the bottom 5%. And so when we got there 3 years ago, our job was to figure out, well, what does that mean? We were allowed to operate schools ourselves, and we were allowed to charter schools. And that was when they said go. So I want to share a little bit about what we've done with that legislation, right? That legislation opened the door. It allowed for us to explore what would we do if we could do anything to radically change the educational opportunities available to students in the bottom 5% schools. What would we do? The first thing we did was we set our BHAG, right? We don't know the BHAG. So the legislation didn't say anything about what turning around a school meant. It just said turn them around, right? And it didn't take long in Tennessee to see the top bullet on most former principals' resume was I got the school off the list. I got it into the 6%. Right? Mission accomplished. State cannot do anything to the school that is off the list. And so the first thing we did was we said we've got to change the conversation about what is turnaround, what is the finish line, what is mission accomplished. And so we looked at data and we tried to set a target. This is also the time of like Herman Cain, 999 deal, right? And so for a second we were really excited about 555, but we realized that to get to the top 5%, that meant that every school we touched had to be better than the current best school in the state. And so we looked at the data and we said, all right, we have 5 years, that's the timeline that we want to use. What's the right benchmark? Is it 10%, 5%, 15%, 20%? When we look at the data, the fastest growing schools, as well as kind of proficiency rates at the 25th%, 20th%, we landed on the 25th%, right? There's a lot of people with slingshots ready to throw rocks at this goal, saying, that's really highfalutin, that's overly ambitious, and it probably is. But at the end of the day, we had to change the conversation about getting off the list. And so to get to the top 25%, a couple things that are worth noting. One, that's mid-50s% overall proficiency, right? So that even the top 25% in Tennessee is not enough, but it's a start. And to get there in 5 years, that's 8 to 10 point proficiency gains every year. How are we going to do it? So we're a statewide district. We have the opportunity to manage the bottom 5% of schools, so we can take them out of the district and give them to charters. So this is a whole lot of jargon, but I think the couple things that I want to really differentiate are, one, we're operator agnostic, which means we don't really care who's running the school. We really care about who's getting results for kids. And if the district, the local district, is getting the best result for kids, they should run more schools. If they're having the best success turning around the schools, they should turn around more schools. So we're operator agnostic, whether it's Charter A, Charter B, Charter C, local district, whoever's getting great results for kids should be getting access to serving more kids. Who's ever struggling should get access to less kids. And that's the portfolio piece, right? So the portfolio means we invest in as many operators as possible, and those that thrive, we want to invest in to grow and serve more kids. Those that initially struggle, we want to figure out how to support and give them a chance to get it right for kids. And those who ultimately fail, despite efforts to support, are out of the game. We're not an adult employment agency. I know that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but our job, our responsibility, our charge, our mission is to give a great education to the underserved kids in Tennessee. And so our job is to make sure that we're finding as many great organizations and educators and putting them in front of the kids who need them most. In terms of our approach, again, learning a lot from what's happening in New Orleans, we really had three kind of fundamental tenets as a statewide district. We bust barriers, whether that's policy, access to resource, relationship building. So we bust barriers, we cultivate capacity, and we drive results. We try and stay as lean as possible as a district. So when we started, you could fit the whole thing in a minivan. Right now, you could probably fit it in like a short bus, but like it's a lean and mean team. People hear district, they think gigantic, decrepit building full of a bunch of people. It's a couple dozen. And all we do is think about how do we find the best operators, how do we find the best educators, how do we bust barriers for them, how do we invest in cultivating their capacity, and how do we drive results for our students. Now here's where I think we're a little bit different, right? And so we are trying to find the best school operators and trying to bring them to the kids. So when we talk about one day, for us, this is a big differentiator. So rather than say, how do we open a bunch of great schools and let the kids figure out how to get there, we're saying, how do we go to where the kids that need great schools most? And how do we find the best operators and send them there? And then the last piece, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper, is it's all about the educators, right? There's nothing at the policy level or the operator level that can make it go if there isn't a great teacher in every classroom, if there isn't a great school leader in every school. And so one of the big things that we've been working on is how do we make Memphis, Tennessee, known as Teacher Town USA, the absolute best place in the country to be an educator. So when we ran the list to figure out who is in the bottom 5%, we had no idea if the 85 schools would be in 85 cities. But when we ran the list, we were really surprised to find out they're highly concentrated in 3 large urban districts. And when this first popped up, the conspiracy theorists went wild about this is Tennessee picking on Memphis again, and there were the shameful snickers of, well, if only Memphis wasn't part of Tennessee, we'd be fine. This was a polarizing reality. But once we got past the shock of like, oh, wow, it actually turned into an incredible opportunity. Because what we learned when we dug into the 68 in Memphis is that those 68 schools were actually highly concentrated in about 5 or 6 neighborhoods. So I want to talk a little about Fraser, right? Fraser's where I live and work in a portable out of a school. So Fraser will get the goosebumps going for me, but this is the reality in Fraser. So this is a school feeder pattern, right? Elementary schools, middle schools, high school. And when we first showed up, I don't know how many of you had a chance to interact with Chris Barbic, our superintendent. He's about yay tall, he's white, he's bald, he's from Texas. He moved to Nashville, drove down to Memphis, and started telling people about their schools not performing well, right? So in terms of how a community should react to a Chris Barbic coming down the road from Nashville to say the state's taking over their school, it's like a comic strip, like this is going to go bad, right? And when Chris walks into the room, round table with faith-based community leaders, nonprofit leaders, this was the first thing we showed him, right? And when we walked in, the body language was like this, like ready to annihilate Chris. But when we put this in front of them and said, listen, we don't have the answer, we don't have the silver bullet, but this is wrong. And to step out, what this means is that the box is red, the school is in the bottom 5% in a state that is achieving at about the 47th highest ranking state in this country. So in Fraser, 14 public schools, 12 are in the bottom 5%. So if your baby is born in Fraser, from pre-K to 12th grade, they are destined or doomed to almost certainly spend their entire education in the bottom 5% school. That's not right. And for us, we saw it as an incredible opportunity. So instead of having to drive around the city and engage alumni groups and high schools all over town, we got to dive really deep into a community, build meaningful relationship with the community, and take a bottoms-up approach. Because for us, the best way to turn around a high schools, have 9th graders show up ready for 9th grade. Best way to turn around a middle schools, have 6th graders show up ready for 6th grade. That's not going to show flashy results in a year or two. But if we start here, we expect the ripple to pay off. And so, as we realized the impact on communities, we wanted to change the way we think about recruiting charters, right? And so instead of asking kids and families, hey, there's a school across town, if you can find transportation, there's a lottery, and if you get in, you'll be in good shape. We wanted to go to those great operators and say, hey, we need you to serve the zoned enrollment. And that's why we're really excited about what's happening in Memphis, because some of the highest performing operators of choice in the country are coming and saying, we've got to figure this out. That kid across the street, no matter what, SPED issues, discipline issues, parent issues, whatever the issues, we've got to figure out how to serve that kid. I want to be clear, it is not rainbows and gumdrops. We are not near where we want to be. The work is incredibly hard, but we're excited about the progress just a few years in. When we made the call to action of, hey, schools of choice who've been incredibly successful in other states, why don't y'all come and run neighborhood schools in Memphis and Tennessee? We had no idea who would come. But we are incredibly excited that some of literally the highest performing operators in the country are coming to Memphis to say, we're going to figure this out, because this is the right thing to do. We've got to figure out how to serve that kid across the street. So some of the best national operators and the best local operators are rolling their sleeves up and figuring out, how do we serve the zoned enrollment? How do we enter the literally physical facility of a failing neighborhood school and turn it into a high-performing neighborhood school? Again, this isn't going to happen just by great operators. The first question they always ask is, where are we going to find the great teachers? Where are we going to find the great leaders? And so I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're really committed to is how do we make Memphis known as Teacher Town? Nonprofits alone are not the solution, but it's incredible how the city is rallying around. Memphis is the place to be if you're a talented, passionate educator. The mission is right, and the investment in you is bottomless in terms of growing you as a teacher leader, a school leader, a support team leader. And so in the last few years, we've been incredibly excited about the number of national and local organizations raise their hands. Yes, let's figure out how to make a city a great place to be a teacher. And I think the piece that's really exciting about this is all the operators are coming together to figure it out. Right? So when we talk about the talent bus, it's not my schools, it's not KIPP schools, it's not Aspire schools. The bus is Memphis. There's 7,000 seats. We need 7,000 great teachers, which means we have to have a citywide talent strategy to be a great place for 7,000 teachers. So we meet monthly to talk about how are we doing for recruiting, how are we doing for support, sustainability, coaching, what are you doing, what am I doing? When one of us goes to recruit in Chicago, we charter a bus and all the operators get on it and we go together to tell the teachers in Chicago why Memphis is the place to be. Just quickly, I want to hit 3 lessons learned. We learn about 1,000 lessons a day. We fail fast, we fail forward. One of the hardest things in a neighborhood school, this isn't rocket science, but the needs of our students are incredibly high, right? So this is your RTI triangle, right? You usually think people draw it like this, where lowest level of need is most kids, highest level of need is fewest kids. The reality in our schools is the exact opposite. It's a totally different game teaching in these schools. Just quickly, in our 9th grade, A quarter of our students were teaching or were on grade level. On average, the class was at the 5th grade level. How do you teach as a teacher when you've got a range from kindergarten to 9th grade? We've got to figure that out. 2, wraparound services. You cannot be a neighborhood school without figuring out how to meet the needs outside of the classroom. And so we're talking about this as a city, we're talking about this as school operators. This is a big question and an area we're spending a lot of time trying to get it right. And then 3, the hidden costs of being a neighborhood school. ALTED, SPED, pre-K. These are all costs that when you're a school of choice, you don't have to take on always, right? When a kid gets expelled from a school of choice, they just land in the neighborhood school. Who knows what the cost is, right? And if they get kicked out of this neighborhood school, they go to the district ALTED school. The district has no idea what that cost is. It just rolls up into a huge hundreds of millions of dollars budget, right? And so as small operators, we're figuring out really quickly, whoo, if I've got one school and I've got to provide service for that child, that's a lot of investment and resource. And so these are 3 questions that we have to figure out as neighborhood schools. How do we meet incredible high need and incredible high percentage of our students? How do we serve the whole student and their families? And how do we understand what the true cost of providing an excellent neighborhood school education is? This is not secret sauce, but there are no silver bullets. There are none. We're just going to have to figure it out. And for those of you that know the Grizzlies, Memphis is all about the grit and the grind. It's going to be hard work. It's not glamorous. Picking yourself up, picking your colleagues up every single day, and figuring it out for our kids. And then, like I said, as a portfolio school district, find the great operators, bring them, give them access to neighborhood schools. Feed. If they're struggling initially, how do you provide the supports that they need to turn the corner on being a great neighborhood school? And then weed. If the school isn't delivering year in and year out, I'm sorry, we love you as adults, we enjoyed working with you, but we can't do this and somebody else can get a shot. So, the call to action. You can't come to a TFA conference without a call to action, right? I started by saying when I came up as a teacher, you could only be a district teacher or a charter teacher. That was it. Either a school of choice or hard knocks neighborhood school, right? I've learned in my time in Tennessee that there's a third way. There's a third way, and it's neighborhood schools. Finding great operators, finding great educators, and ask them, don't build a school of choice in the strip center across from the neighborhood school, become the neighborhood school, replace the neighborhood school. And those of you that are in policy, create the policy that incents and creates a context for that. For those of you that are in districts, be open-minded to other operators serving your most underserved communities. As school leaders, think about where can I place my school? Is there a way to work with the district if you're a charter operator to say, hey, how about instead of slowly bleeding the enrollment out of that school, how about you give me a shot at that school? And here's all I ask, I need the facility at no cost. So that's what we offer, by the way. If you become a neighborhood school in Memphis, you get the facility at no cost. Each of you in your roles can figure out how do we get to that kid whose parents won't take them to the lottery day, who don't have access to the transportation to get to the school that they want to get to. If we're going to get to one day quicker, we've got to bring the best schools we've got, the best educators we got, to the kids who need them most. So thank you all very much. Email here, happy to talk with you if I can help.
So, once again, a big thank you to Ash and Maggie for talking about at a high level how we can go in. Some quick takeaways just personally that I learned today, in thinking about really being strategic. And I know Chris personally, and it's parent and student choice. How do we give parents and students more choice? I heard a lot of this portfolio model. I've seen it play out in New Orleans, as you guys just saw, and obviously it's playing out well in the state of Tennessee. I've seen, Tom Bosenberg in Denver has implemented the portfolio model, and we've seen success in Denver as well. I know Massachusetts as a state is moving there to offer more choice to parents and kids. And the big thing for me is No one's saying like this is the way. And all those schools have very different models. Like the goal is like how do we get children to learn? And I think for me, you know, and I'll close with this as we walk away is, you know, I started out in college as an engineer at Virginia Tech, and so I think, you know, when I became a principal and a teacher, when I talked to my staff, I said, you know, I really need you guys to be education engineers, because an engineer has to build a bridge across a river. They don't have control of the mountain, they don't have control of the river, they don't have control of all this sort of, you know, geography that's there. They just got to figure out how to build that bridge. And I think, you know, we don't have control over poverty, we don't have control over gangs and drugs and these things that are going to be around forever. But for me, I have 3 boys, I'm about to have a 4th. You know, I'm stressed. Where do I send them to school? I've been in education for 20 years, and I've been working hard, and now it's really hitting home for me with my own personal, you know, child. I love the children I work with, but now I'm thinking, what do I do with my boys? And I think as educators, as leaders, and as parents, and as teachers, and as district leaders, how can we be educational engineers? You know, how can we be focused on how do we get there versus let's not focus on what we don't have control over, but let's be creative in how we sort of get there. I think today you saw 2 creative models of getting there. It's really neat to see 2 people I've been in a fight with for a long time. And I'm just going to close this out with this is a quote that I think also exemplifies what we need to do and what they've done, and why I'm just inspired to hear their stories and inspired by the possibility is that it's scary to take on this turnaround work, whether it's just from a personal career choice or just a personal choice. It's scary to fail. And I'll be honest, when I was doing this turnaround work in Houston, I failed a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure Maggie and Ash can tell you about the challenges. You know, I just want to help solve the problem. And I think if we can get over that fear of failing, fear of what people might think, we come to what this quote from T.S. Eliot, you know, only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. So I encourage you all to continue in this fight to be educational engineers, to push whether you're a parent or a teacher or a leader for options and for something different in order to get our children. So thank you so much for your passion and your commitment to the children of this country. Closing the gap. Thank you all. Thank you.